Hi, I'm Teresa Bruno here on the Soul Talks podcast with my very good friend Natalia LePivert. And today we're going to continue discussing our stories of survival and hope and talk about how guilt and gratitude, two disparate emotions, play as we are on our roads to recovery. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hey, good friend.
Hello, how are
It's
you?
nice to be with you again today. We left last week and we were talking about the role that guilt plays. And yet, I think we are both quick to agree that there's a very healthy part of guilt that comes into play when you're coming out of a deep tragedy, betrayal, huge destruction in your life. I think we all have feelings of guilt. My Lord, I had so much guilt, especially coming out of the loss of my business. I carried guilt that as a woman, I didn't make it. I had a first business that was very successful. And then this second business, which was the business I adored the most, did not make it. Yes, there was fraud, but I didn't find it. I had so much guilt coming out of that. But I like to say, and I know you and I have talked about this, that guilt does have agency to kind of look back and say, how could I have done it differently? But you were talking a little bit about that. You want to take us where you were?
I think for me, when I look at the guilt that I had, it was more of like, when I look back, did I make the right choices? Why did I miss something? Where did I miss? Did I not see the relationship going south? And like, I felt guilty, like, and even like regret. I feel like guilt and regret, it's kind of like a mixed emotion, the two. It's hard to like see where one starts, the other one ends. And I had so much guilt and regret about like leaving everything behind to marry this person, or guilt like I'm 34 and I'm divorced, and I'm like, am I going to have kids? Am I going to get married again? Like, there's so much guilt about all these different things. The way I've been able to make sense of the guilt and the regret is if I only look as a negative, I'm never going to be able to move forward from the guilt. So I have to look back and not look at it just as a failure, but like, did I learn something? Did I grow from this? What can I do different? Because I can't change what happened. And if you sit in that feeling, you're just gonna feed more into your guilt and then into fears and shame and all the other stuff, right? So if I can look back and see and take ownership for my part, right? Yes, I chose to leave everything behind to move here and marry this person, but it was really what I wanted at that time. So do I really have to have guilt about it because it didn't end the way I wanted it? Yes, it was outside of my control, but it worked for a while. So I've learned to use gratitude to look as a like, yes, it didn't end up perfect. It didn't ended up the way I wanted it, but I got so much out of it.
I've told you this story so many times. And over the last 4.5 years, one of the visuals that somehow has appeared in my mind is of me walking on a tightrope. And I've got a cup in each hand. And it's different things, different days, but there are many days it is that cup of guilt or regret, and I'm trying to balance it up against gratitude. One of the things that I started to do early on after James died, and it's such a tiny little minuscule thing, but I would get up in the morning, I would get my coffee, I would go back to bed. Most mornings I would cry. It was almost uncontrollable because it was a private time. There was nobody around and I could cry. But I started just this tiny little practice of we lived in a house where the windows of the master bedroom faced out to some mountains, and there was no development. It was just a really pretty view in front of me. And so I'd get up every morning and I'd pull those drapes open. And this sounds so tiny, but it would turn my day. Just the act of opening the drapes and going, I'm alive today. This is a new day. the constancy element we talked about
Yeah.
last week certainly came into play. But that tiniest little moment of just going, okay, I am alive today, and this is another day. And of course, saying, thank you that I'm alive. I could turn some of that regret and guilt into some gratitude. But you said something else a minute ago, I have to fly with, because it's so good, and it's such a principle I've come to believe in. Um, I had a marketing business for 17 years, and it was just a beautiful Fabergé egg of a business, and had a great run with it. And mostly, was in the place of coaching and doing creative work and strategy for major companies. And here I am now coaching a number of small entrepreneurial women in their businesses. They're not necessarily business people. They're women with a passion for something they really want to make happen. And I can hopefully bring to them some business principles. But one of the things I've learned, and I've learned it through all of my travails and in business, is I always ask, and I now ask it of myself, it doesn't matter if your business completely fails. I lost my most beloved business. Or if your business makes $1 billion. The real thing that matters, and the real thing that matters in life, and you hit on it, is ask the question, how did I grow from it? How did I, Teresa Bruno, grow from the loss of that beloved business? And how am I growing to get past, to get through, to survive the loss of my husband? I really feel like our life's journey is really defined by how did you grow?
I agree. And I think it's also like have this idea that guilt has to be negative.
True.
But it's not. It's okay for you not to be okay. It's okay for you to do things and they don't go right. And because that's the only way you're going to be able to do different and learn something. If you always do it and get it right the first time, like that would be, you might be excited the first time, but at some point it's going to get boring because you're always just doing the basic. You're not challenging yourself. You're not getting out of there. And I think a lot of just, we talked about, it's so easy to want to quit. And it applies to this too, because when you feel guilty of something, you want to stop. You don't want to take a chance again. You don't want to take a jump on the next business venture or the next relationship or the next job, whatever that is, because now you have guilt, you have all these regrets, and like these feelings can consume you so much, and it's so destructive when you get into that place where all you see is the wrong part of it. But when you look at things that you feel guilty, I can guarantee you can find something that it was good about it. You might have not in that moment realize it, but if you look back, you've learned something. I used to have a lot of guilt from, like, I went to law school, right? And I didn't really practice because I moved here and it didn't transfer, different countries, different laws. And people would always make these comments, and I still hear this, oh, you were a lawyer and now you're a trainer, or it's like, why is that one better than the other? Yes, I have a law degree. I still have the knowledge that it gave me. I still apply to a lot of stuff. I'm only able to do the things I do now because I did that. So if I only looked at it as a failure, oh, I didn't make anything out of it, it would consume me. But being able to utilize that to apply to every single transaction I have in my life, it helps me, like, yeah, there's value to it. So I'm grateful I went to law school. I'm not guilty I didn't practice. So you flip the script.
That is so powerful. I love that term, flipping the script. It just takes me to several different places, because I have carried a lot of guilt and carried it in a negative way, just like I've carried shame and sat on the sofa, not literally really, but sat alone is kind of for several years. But I can also look back, we always talk about beauty from ashes, or pulling the beauty through the journey, even though the journey is so rugged and
Messy.
falling apart and messy all the time. I'm messy a lot of the time, most of the time. But and you say this a lot too, without saying it, every little thing is a stepping stone to the next thing. It is the life journey that is teaching us. We're coming out of it. I feel like after what I've been through the last 4.5 years, I'm not remotely the person I was when that business debacle happened or when I lost my husband. And they are in ways I like better about myself. I feel like I am about as vulnerable as a human being could get. I pretty much wear, a lot of what's happened to me on the outside. And part of my survival journey has been learning to share it because I am so convicted that to hold on to it and to keep it quiet is not in any way helping the world, because as I said, I think everybody's in a survival mode. And I want to at least, kind of be that motivator for people to look at their hard truths, their hard realities. If I don't say mine, how can I expect anybody else to, make progress? But in looking back, and I'm not as far along as you are, but in looking back, I love the vulnerability that has come into my life. I've completely redefined what I think success is.
I think,
I feel you thinking.
you were saying something, and I'm just thinking, it's like there is this thing of like we all have an expectation of ourselves, but we also expect everyone else to always keep it together. Right? Always keep it together. We're always here. So like if you're now feeling guilty or you're feeling messy, we are the first ones to think we're wrong. Like I used to have this friend when I lived in Texas, and we kept in touch for a while after I moved out of Texas. And as I was traveling, he would like DM me, hey, how's everything going? I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to get my life together. And he will always make fun of me because I was always saying this. And I'm like, yeah, it's always going to be like that because there's always something that's going to be happening. So I'm like, I'm okay with like, being a hot mess, like, a good hot mess. But I think it's okay when you're in this point of guilt, and like you have to learn to look at the right things, and it has to be a skill that you develop.
It is. It's one of the tools. If I could teach tools, one of the biggest ones I would give anybody in the world for anything you're going through is, I don't care how tough it is, find that one little point of gratitude, just one tiny little, pinhead of gratitude. Yeah. Because I think about it as an eraser or a reverser,
Yes.
It just, what did you say earlier? How
it's a shifter.
It's a shifter,
yeah.
course corrector.
Yeah.
On all the pain. You at least can see a tiny little moment, out when you can find those points of gratitude, and then they, it's like baby steps become big steps.
But I think it's like if somebody's like listening to us talking, right? And they're in the moment, they're like, oh my God, these people are like, they're so out of it. They don't know what they're talking about. Because when that's valid. Because when you are in the middle of that hurricane of feelings, of things falling apart or whatever that is, you will not be able to see it. I feel like you owe to yourself as a person to fight when it's easy to give up. You owe to yourself to force yourself to figure out what is good about. And it's a skill that you have to develop. You have to practice every day. But here's the thing, you have to practice when everything is good.
That's a great point.
Good. Felt really good about it.
But seriously, I don't think about it. I'm always trying to get out of my pain. Give me gratitude.
But if you think about it, when everything is good, if you don't look and appreciate what's good, because it's easy to like, oh, everything is fine now, and you just get in a routine, and you're on a flow, and you're just doing the same things, and you ignore what's happening. The moment everything falls apart, it's so easy for you to like forget about everything else that's still there and it's still good. Because this one thing that's really bad right now in your life, it's consuming you so much.
Absolutely.
If you learn how to appreciate things every single day, now when things fall apart, you can still remind yourself of it. When you were talking about opening the drapes earlier, right? So when I moved to Texas, I used to live in this apartment, and I had, it was a small apartment, and I was on the top floor, which was like the third floor. It wasn't anything crazy, but I had this beautiful, beautiful view of the sunrise. And it was like, I could see the city, I could see everything. There was like nothing. It was so amazing. And I wake up super early, right? So I'm like, every day I made a point that I was gonna, like, whatever I needed to plan myself in a way that I could sit there in my little balcony and I could watch it. Because there was something about that was just so pretty. And it reminds you that that's like, yeah, everything is a mess and your life is completely out of your control. You don't know what's happening tomorrow. You have no idea of your future. But that is a constant. And you're gonna tell me there's not a sunrise that's ugly. So it's a pretty thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's very hard. I've never met somebody that looked at sunrise and didn't like it. So it's going to do the job for you. You just got to show up. So I did that for a long time, and I still do it. Where I work, if I'm training somebody, I know at a certain time I can look through the window and the sun is rising and I can see it. I don't have the opportunity to be out there anymore, but I'm still doing it and I'm mindful about it.
It's a mindfulness practice.
The client that's with me has no idea what I'm doing, but in my mind, I'm thinking about it. And I did it when I was in Italy. I did it when I was in Asia. I did it throughout this whole time. And that's the one thing I will constantly do it. I could be driving, and if I see it, it's the first thing that I think about
It's
it.
that thing that turns everything for you. As we're sitting here talking, I feel like I got to go backwards a little bit, because I think there's some questions that beg to be asked, and they're really, it's about hard things that are part of my journey.
Yeah.
And you and I haven't really talked about this, but it's easy to talk about guilt, and maybe guilt has agency. I think it's beautiful to talk about gratitude, and I 100% agree and grab onto it. And it has been part of what's led me out. I haven't talked to very many people who've experienced suicide of someone close to them. I don't know that there's any way to be near someone else taking their life, someone you loved and lived with and, was the fabric of your life, without asking the questions, without having extreme guilt in the early days. Everybody can say, and I'll speak a little bit to this, that you couldn't have done anything. This was going to happen. It's one thing to hear that. It's a totally different thing to metabolize that. But I don't want to run by the seriousness, just the gut-wrenching place you go to when you're on the other side of dealing with that. And that I don't think you can get through it without asking the questions. How could I have helped? How could I have seen what was happening? How could I have helped him? Is that guilt, or is that just natural questioning that comes with this? But I don't want to run by it and act like it can just be turned off with gratitude, because it's not that easy. It's months and months and months of wrestling with questions you don't have answers to, and grieving the things you wish you could have done but didn't know you needed to do, things like that. So I just felt like it was important today to put that out on the table and say, yes, I have learned to be grateful. Yes, it is a practice. It's a mindful practice, but gosh.
Do you think you learn how to be grateful because you ask the questions?
I think that's a good question. I think I came to these periods in my life where I'd spent a lot of time in gratefulness practices. I'd spent a lot of time already learning breathing practices that helped me. I'd spent a lot of my life reading poetry that filled me up with ways to look at the world. And so I think I had tools going into it. So ask that question again. Let me answer it.
Do you think you found the gratitude because you were asking the questions, because you were asking if there was anything else you could have done? How did you miss that? Like, you were asking questions. Did those questions lead you to your gratitude for them, for what happened, to find the nuggets within what happened.
I'm not sure I can answer it that black and white.
Yeah.
What it led me to in my head was I had a therapist at the time, and she's this just tough, late 70s woman who just gnarly. She just was so provocative in the way she therapized. And I was, sobbing. How could, just so messy. And she was like, and I would say to her, I am so lonely. I can't handle it. I cannot, I'd never lived alone, and I would just say, I can't stand the loneliness. And she would say, what? You don't like being with yourself? And I mean, I remember just wanting to come out in rage after her. But what she also said to me in those times of my just, how many boxes of Kleenex did I use in her office? She said, Teresa, with any suicide, but especially because my husband went to her as well before he died, there is nothing you could have done to prevent this. This didn't start this year or last year or 5 years ago. This started so long ago. This was coming, and he was masterful at hiding this side of himself. And so for those who are listening, I think it's just really important to know that seldom does suicide start in the moment or the night before, the week before it happens. It's something that's building in others' consciousness and what comes at them in life. So she was very, with all her provocativeness, that was tough sometimes, she gave me that thing to hang on to. And it really was that sentence from her that allowed me to kind of flip that guilt. And then, the place I went over and over and over was I was grateful for his life. I was grateful for what he gave us. And I have to, I'm sure every mother says this, but I just think my two sons are two of the best human beings in the world, and he was their dad, and he was an incredible dad, and they are so much like him. So easy every day looking at them to be grateful for what I have because of him. So yes, I could come out of those questions with gratefulness, but not easily.
No.
And not in a short amount of time.
And that's what I said. It's like, it's something you have to keep working on it. You have to ask yourself every day. You got to really try, because it's so easy for the guilt to come back 6 months later. For like
every day,
it's gonna come back. It or something might happen. It might remind you of it, and it's like, how do you get out of it? You have to continue to think to find something that's good, even if it's your own company.
And I have learned to be alone with my own company, and I'm a lot better with it today than I was 3.5 years ago. But yeah, I think something good, somehow comes out of even the very, very worst of things. But it's really tough to drag that beauty through the rugged streets of recovery.
And for everybody, it's going to be different. Even their scenarios are going to be different. So even if you got someone else that lost someone through suicide, that's going to be completely different than it was for you.
Right.
Every story is going to be different, and nobody's going to fully understand what somebody else, even though on the outside might look similar, it's going to be so different.
Absolutely.
And everybody's going to have their own pace and their own time to do it. But I think what we want to share is there is a hope that that feeling is going to go away, or it's going to diminish, and you able to find joy and gratitude again, because it's so hard to see when you're in a moment. When you in that moment that everything is, you feel horrible, you feel guilty, it's so hard to see. You wish you could go back in time.
Oh, a million times do I wish for that. A million times do I wish I could have done it differently to keep it from happening, but I couldn't. But I think a gratitude practice definitely turns things, but it's okay to be in guilt. But as long as you're asking the questions, how can I be better from it? And again, I say it over and over, and my story could get old, but having children whom I needed to live for, and I think anybody who's gone through suicide of a spouse especially, the motivator is, if you choose to do the same, if you choose to let your life just fall apart, if you choose just not to go on living, that is such a disservice to those you are left to lead. Because what I found, I never expected to feel like this. I mean, within minutes, I was the mom and the dad. You know, I was the one who had to figure out how to pay everything and fix the falling down windows and, you know, take care of this house and cars and all the stuff I just, it wasn't my world. And so I think when you fold in on yourself, you know, everybody around you really needs you to keep going. It is a motivation to keep going.
Yeah. And it goes back to like, it's okay for you not to be okay. You just
Which I love that phrase.
You gotta find a way to like move on, right? It's okay. It's okay if today you wake up and you feel like a hot mess.
Most days.
Yeah, it's okay. It happens quite often, and you acknowledge it and you understand that, and you figure out how to move on and how do you fix it, and you ask your questions, and it takes time. It takes so much time, but there's so much hope. I think the reason I keep repeating this is because it's so easy to let the guilt turn into shame and turn into fear and just consume yourself with those feelings. You have to push yourself out of there. We've talked about having people around to keep you grounded and doing this. Staying in this place of gratitude will ground you into more. There's more after. There's more after all this pain.
I mean, philosophically, I'm a firm believer in it, and I, you know, I would always say there's always some glimmer of light somewhere, you know, and you can always, you know, talk about that. There's, you know, on the other side of this horrific pain, there has to be some happiness. It's just finding the rope. You know, how do you find the rope to hang on to pull you through? Yes, somewhere you find that little piece of light, and mine was as simple as getting up in the morning and pulling the drapes. Just that act. And doing it every day and saying, okay, I'm alive. I can walk down the hallway and make my coffee. You know, it was
like, I got this somehow.
I just had enough, whatever it took to get down the hall to make the coffee, you know, but there was just some movement toward positivity in just the smallest act.
Yeah, and you get attached to like some silly little like things throughout your day to like keep you moving. Like I used to like go do my cardio before, like in the afternoon. I had these like little things that I had to do. It was kind of like checking boxes. Okay, if I can get through these basic stuff in my day,
I know that.
I made it. And it'll be like the most stupid things. Like some days it could be like, hey, you know, I washed my hair, a shower, you know, I ate. It could be the most silly thing. And it's like, okay, if I got these little things done, I made it. And then slowly you can add more things to that list because you're able to feel a little bit better and complete a little bit more tasks, and you start feeling like yourself again. And it takes time, and sometimes you might be stuck with a list that's like this big before you can get to a little bit more.
Oh, I used to kind of go through my day, and one of the places where I was fortunate was that I still had a business to run, and I had people to manage, and we were in the middle of COVID, and nobody knew how to do work, you know, I mean, I have this office, this beautiful new office, and you know, we weren't going in, and I have
it's empty.
I'm beginning to manage through Zoom, you know, and that was all very new, but it was a profound gift to me. I had a wonderful staff. Most of them were young-ish, men and women, more girls than guys, and I look back on that time, and I can't even imagine how hard it was on them to know that their boss, you know, was going through this, and I didn't really talk about it. I mean, after I told them, after we went through the things that had to be said, I just kept going. But especially those young women, they through, you know, 8 hours a day on Zoom or whatever it was, just the presence of them, it was like they sort of built this framework underneath me that I knew, okay, I'm not talking about what's wrong. I'm not talking about that the second I get off that call, I'm going to close the door and sob my eyes out. I barely got through that 50 minutes. But they built something for me, and I've gone back to each of them recently and, you know, told them that I couldn't say it then, but how incredibly important it was to me. They were there every day, smiles on, never asked a question, worked their tails off to produce great creative in that marketing firm. And that held me up.
Do you think that maintain like some sense of like normalcy in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I can see that because it's like, okay, this part is still, I can still keep my mask on here because this hasn't changed. But then once you go home, it's like everything is different.
Yes, and the mask sometimes then becomes a little bit more each day the norm. Okay, I held it together for this, so maybe tonight when I go home, I won't drink as much wine. I might make a phone call to a friend instead of just sitting alone.
Yeah.
You know, little things you begin to add on, like you've said,
Yeah.
and the mask kind of extends itself out. But, and I'm a broken record here, but anybody who's going through any suffering, reach out to those around you. You know, try to stay in contact with somebody all the time because it's what will keep you moving.
100%. 100%.
Thank you so much for being with us today. You know, survival of any kind is not easy, but as you heard both Natalia and I say, we want to encourage you always to find the people and the tools that give you something to hang on to. It is so important. We can't stress it enough that you keep connecting to your family and your friends, even when you don't want to, and we get it. Sometimes we really just want to hide. But when you reach out, even if it's just one text a day to a friend, it can give you enough hope to get through that day. So join us next week as we begin to explore how shame keeps us in secrecy, but how to find ways out of that secrecy and shame.